With that, I will hand it over to Ed Manansala. Ed is the County Superintendent of Schools in El Dorado County and the President of CSESA. And before working in El Dorado, he served as Chief of Staff in Sacramento City Unified School District, was the Superintendent of St. Hope Public Schools, and the Principal of Sacramento Charter High School. Please join me in welcoming Ed.
Good morning. If there's seats available here up front, if I see some people standing in the back, so if you want to come up. So it's an honor to be here with you. It really is. There are three things that I would like to highlight today. One, equity. Two, the system of support. And three, a deep collective ownership. Without question, issues of equity and opportunity gaps remain. To confront inequity, we must be deliberate and focus on access, opportunity, and meeting needs of every student in California. And after 6 years of intense educational reform, we're now in a time where the focus is on the how to achieve equity at scale. In respect to the system of support, since the inception of LCFF in 2013, there have been tremendous changes, and a key link to the success of the reforms is the implementation of the system of support. And this is where we are now. In respect to deep collective ownership, again, this is a critical time for California students, and we must possess deep collective ownership and a unified commitment to every student. Let's start here. All students will succeed in school and life. That's the aspirational promise here in California and across the United States. But we know we've not achieved it. And as a result of this, we see the lack of achievement or the opportunity gaps that are occurring in schools and districts. And as a result of that, there's just a motivation at the federal and state level to continue to address manners of accountability. And at times, we've shifted from a punitive accountability stance to one of support. And I've experienced that from the pre-punitive stage to the punitive stage to now what I would almost describe as one of support and continuous improvement. And give me an opportunity to give you a glimpse on what that feels like from my perspective. So in the mid-1990s, I had this desire to work with kids in an urban community here in Sacramento called Oak Park. And I moved into the community, coached basketball, mentored, tutored, volunteered at a local church, just immersed into the community. And I eventually started working for Sutter Health, developing a multi-service center in Oak Park. And I remember running into a researcher in this clinic, and she said, Ed, if you're looking at sustainable, long-term, effective change, there's two systems in particular you may want to consider immersing in. One, the juvenile justice system, or two, the education system. In 1998, I crossed into education and immersed into a school called Bret Hart Elementary School. It served Oak Park kids. Beautiful school. And I spent time with teachers and the administration in developing learning support services in that school while they were trying to improve the academic achievement. Again, this is in 1998, what I would call the pre-punitive stage. And while we were there was a fundamental question that we continued to ask to parents and kids. What are your hopes and dreams for your children? We would do this in homes. We'd meet on the weekends. We'd go in with teachers, and we'd just spend time really understanding what would need to take place inside of this school. Engagement in a very authentic level. But what we didn't see was this. There was a missile coming our way, and it was titled IIUSP. was the Immediate Intervention Underperforming Schools program. And I remember while we were developing a very grassroots level effort within the school, Bret Harte in 1999 became an IIUSP school. I remember sitting with the teachers when the individual came in to provide a level of support and intervention to our school. And he described what would take place in terms of the assessment process and what I would almost describe as a prepackaged plan of action depending on what that assessment was, and then what the consequences would be to our school if it wasn't reached, pulling a funding or level of restructuring. I remember looking at one of my colleagues when he walked out and I said, now, where is this guy from? And someone said, I think he just transitioned from working at Kodak. I said, the camera company? And they said, yes, I think he's trying to make a change into education. And two, I remember saying, are you all motivated? Because I'm not feeling really motivated about this change, right? But that was exactly what we encountered at Bret Harte Elementary. Fast forward through waves of accountability changes, and we come to the new accountability system. I remember David Sapp introducing the new accountability system to a group of county superintendents. He said, in essence, there are three things to take into consideration with the new accountability system. One, it's going to be more than a single number. Two, equity is at the heart. And three, the focus would be on local control. And these resonated with us. These principles resonated with us and these practices. Just the idea that a quality education is defined more broadly than a single test, or in respect to equity, a focus on student groups and a high-need student groups in particular is at the heart of the system. And this idea of local decision-making, providing tools to districts and providing a level of feedback just to community members that would allow us to develop plans in a true local fashion. So here's what we do know. And I recognize you can't see the numbers, but it's just more a visual representation. Even in the implementation of LCFF, or we look back 10 years with getting down to facts the first round, or getting down to facts this round, is that inequity remains. And the data is evident, and it's highlighted often. But the question that I'd like to pose is, especially when we're looking out 10 years from now, as Heather described, is if we were to achieve equity in California, what would it look like? What would it feel like? This is an important question that we need to be asking. So we know what the current evidence states, and we know what we're trying to aspire to, but can we articulate what California would look like if we were dealing with a state that has achieved equity? I asked this question to many people, and there was one individual, Shane Safier, founding principal of June Jordan School for Equity, who shared this with me in an email. And she said, Ed, this is off the cuff, but I'm going to send it your way. And I thought, that's brilliant. I'm going to share that publicly one day. Here's what Shane said. Again, answering the question, if we were to achieve equity in California, what would it look like? Schools would be reimagined and designed to support and nurture relationships as a core value. Houses, advisories, block schedule, looping, coring, as well as built-in collaboration for teachers and regular parent conferences and engagements. Deeper learning and authentic assessment experiences would be widely and generously available to every child in every school. Curriculum and professional learning would incorporate discussions of identity, power, privilege, and race. Educators would talk to each other about barriers to equity, including structural racism, implicit bias, and microaggressions. School cultures for children and adults would exude love and belonging. From a moment they entered the school building to the moment they crossed the classroom threshold, children would be seen, heard, and valued. Metrics would flow from this renewed reality. A through G completions would soar for all populations. Chronic absence chronic attendance would plummet as schools and districts wrapped around every child and family with humanizing services like home visits, mental health supports, and parent empowerment programs. And college persistence rates would skyrocket. We could continue. We could continue in that description. What we recognize, even though we may speak to a picture of what equity would look like in contrast to the current reality, we know this: we have a lot of work to do. And with the inception and intent of LCFF, are we on the right track? I believe we are. And I believe a viable foundation is beginning to take shape. Fortunately, the signals that we're receiving from Governor Newsom, signals we're receiving from Superintendent Thurman and others, is that there are not going to be dramatic policy shifts. And as practitioners in the field who've been implementing dramatic change, that is good news because we have much work before us. The principles of local control and equity and emphasis on continuous improvement remain. And the initial policy elements are accomplishing what were intended. State to district distribution of resources is more equitable. And we know in particular, we still need to increase funding at multiple levels. So let's look at the 4 elements of LCFF, just as a reminder. And then what I'm going to do is talk about it. What did it feel like for practitioners, be it from a county superintendent lens or district leaders and principals when this was rolling out in the last few years? So first, the funding formula just came into play. Then the local control accountability plans. And reiterations were taking place even in the implementation of these plans. And then the dashboard rolled out. Then after the dashboard, we needed to adjust to differentiated assistance. In 2013, I transitioned from Sac City Unified School District to El Dorado County Office of Education. I just began to ride the LCFF wave. And I remember spending one-on-ones with district superintendents, and I just wanted to understand how are things going in the implementation of the Common Core state standards. Like, that was a heavy lift in and of itself. And there was so much work to do, and there still is so much work to do in adjusting to the instructional strategies and the curriculum taking place with Common Core. But then again, the LCAPs rolled along, and then the dashboards came along, and then it was congratulations to some of the districts. You've been identified for differentiated assistance. And no matter how much we tried to front load the mindset shift and practices of LCFF, it didn't matter when we approached some of the districts who were identified for differentiated assistance. One would say, we have been reviewing the data, we anticipated this was coming. Another superintendent I met with said, you know, it's good to have you come alongside. We've been looking forward to this process to develop. A third one said, oh, I'm very familiar with this process. I've gone through program improvement. In other words, he was saying, I've encountered that missile, right? Like that's a completely different approach than what we're trying to establish with LCFF. The mindset and practices of what we're trying to do here in California are significant. What I did realize is that even as a principal, when I was trying to improve instruction in the classroom and the culture, you had to create one of the most safe environments. You had to speak to an ability to say to your teachers, we're going to lift the roof off and create an environment where we can share our practices and learn together. And that's what's starting to take place here in California and in various counties and districts. So let's look at the dashboard results as a reminder of where we are as they set the stage to talk about the system of support. In 2017, 228 districts were eligible for differentiated assistance. In 2018, 374 districts were qualified for differentiated assistance. And then of the 374, 244 of those districts were identified for differentiated assistance as a result of the performance of students with disabilities. This is huge in terms of what we're looking at. If we look at the goal of the system of support, again, it's ambitious. To assist local educational agencies and their schools in meeting the needs of each student served, with a focus on building capacities to sustain improvement and effectively address inequities in student opportunities and outcomes. This is a complex system of support. And if you look at what's being designed, this is just from a concentric circle standpoint. You see local educational agencies at the center, schools and districts, county offices that are providing support, in a sense, the first responders to districts that are being identified for differentiated assistance. And then you go on beyond there. My intent is not to break down the entirety of the system of support, but what I'm saying is it's complex in nature in trying to address multiple needs. But it needs to make sense ultimately to a district leader, a principal, and a group of teachers. It speaks to three different tiers of support. Level 1, support to all schools. Level 2, which I just was speaking to, schools that are identified for differentiated assistance. And level 3 will be districts that are dealing with pervasive issues. And right now we know differentiated assistance, or level 2, is what's before us. There are multiple challenges and opportunities before us. The question that county offices are asking throughout the state is, how do we increase the quality of services to districts in need of support by decreasing the variability that's occurring across the state? Increasing quality and decreasing variability. I've had opportunities to present before the state board, and I was sharing before my colleagues earlier this week. And I said, you know, you'll present to the state board, and I'll speak to what's occurring, say, in El Dorado County with some of our districts. And then the quiet whisper at times, or sometimes the public push, would be, it's great to hear the success, be it in your county or other counties, but I'm not necessarily hearing that in all other counties. And so this idea of the systems of support, partnership with agencies and organizations, is a really important place for us as county offices right now. So in the summer of 2017, and the reason why I'm calling that out is the system of support has been in development for only about 15 months. And there's a tremendous amount of pressure in the development of that system. And in November of 2017, as a county superintendent, partnered with Dr. Jennifer O'Day in the California Collaborative on District Reform, and we opened up our county office and said, come to our county office and let's focus on the system of support. So we had researchers, practitioners, funders, policymakers coming in, and we looked at the principles, or we wanted to identify solid principles of what we thought would be around an effective system of support based on what we've learned. I want to underscore what I just shared. We opened our doors as a county office, positioning to look at how we support districts, and said, come alongside of us. While there is great expectations around county offices, we do not have the answers now. Do you hear that? And that we are in a place of growth and improvement. So we learned some things through that process. One, a system of support needs to be coherent. So let me share you what coherence does not look like. Earlier this week, the 58 county superintendents got together and we said, let's try to take a picture of all of the initiatives and things that have been moving in these last 4 or 5 years. And this is what we came up with. A tremendous amount of bubbles. And I'm not going to read all of the things on these bubbles, but I do remember this. I was speaking to a superintendent who was trying to describe what was taking place in his district. And he said, you know, it's been great to be a part of this process around the LCFF implementation, but with all of the changes with the LCAP and the initiatives and state standards, and he kept on going on, he said, I literally am beginning to feel like I'm going to have a psychological break. Like there's just so much going on. And the question is, how do we continue to provide a level of coherence, meaning a system of support that aligns to a district's goals and strategies, and one that makes sense for them? We know that we need to focus on building capacity. And that's why I spoke to you about how we as county offices are continuing to build partnerships and opening our doors with others. For example, in El Dorado County, we've partnered with Pivot to focus on developing a rural professional learning network. We've partnered with CORE to really look more closely at timely and effective data. We're developing a partnership with Bellwether to look at collective impact in serving our most vulnerable youth in our county. We're seeing emerging issues cut across our county, and we know that partnership is important. In respect to continuous improvement, we know we need to be continuing to look at data collection, reflection, and improvement. So let me speak to my last 2 points. This idea of deep collective ownership. The ability to achieve equity in California is going to be significant, and it's going to be something that we will need to partner well in. It makes me think about this. Does anyone remember this group of students or kids? These are a group of Thai students, and they were trapped in a cave in June 2018 for almost 2 weeks. Many of you may recall this event, and some of you may not. But in June 23rd, these 12 boys were celebrating some event, and they decided to go into the cave with their coach, and they ended up getting lost as a result of a flood coming in. And they were like 2+ miles away from where they entered the cave. And the individuals were saying, why can't they just drill from the surface and extract these kids when they located them? And the reason for that was they were so deep underneath the surface, it was equivalent to the Empire State Building in length on top of the Empire State Building. And so what was fascinating during this time of this cave rescue was I was so much immersed in the development of the system of support. And in respect to this rescue, they had 1,000 international volunteers and military personnel coming together, very clear on what their mission was: to rescue those 12 kids and that coach in a healthy manner. They needed experts from external to their local community, even though the Thai Navy SEALs were really driving the work. So they brought in these 2 experts from Great Britain because they knew what it took to navigate caves. And it was just fascinating, the celebration and the worldview on this event when they rescued them. To me, it reminds me of what we're trying to do here in California. We need to partner up collectively with a deep level of commitment. The last time I spoke publicly and shared stories about what took place even in the local community that I was a principal of, I remember sharing, and this was in a UC Davis environment, that while we're trying to achieve equity and while we're trying to achieve great work for our kids, I was referencing that I would teach a class even while I was a principal to stay close to those kids. And when I was sharing just less than 2 years ago, that week that I was sharing, I learned that one of my students had been shot and killed. And I was saying just how profound this work is and the implications on our communities. Ironically, in preparation for this presentation, last week, I had another student who died. And I am not going to end this presentation again on that level of urgency. But it's just the issues that we are dealing with truly are vital. So allow me to finish on a high note. One of the students that I had the privilege to teach 10 years ago, her name was Lene Washington. And Lene Washington was one who had multiple challenges around her. And we said, again, when she would share her hopes and dreams, we're going to do what we can to create a system around her that created high expectations and care, and that was personal. We partnered with others. We looked at boldly changing the graduation requirements. We provided multiple services around her. And we saw great change around these kids. And then recently, in the spring, I had the opportunity to travel to advocate on behalf of California and Washington, D.C. And lo and behold, here comes a text my way. And it says, Mr. Manansala, are you in D.C.? This is Lene Washington. You have to come see me at my school. And I had this wonderful opportunity to see Lene 10 years later. And she was just north of Washington, D.C., teaching a class. And I remember driving through that neighborhood. And it's awesome to see individuals, children who become adults and who understand the importance of equity, not only for the system, but for themselves, and then give back. And what was most beautiful about this visit was when Lene said, Mr. Manansala, do you mind standing up? Because I want my children to tell you what their hopes and dreams are. We need to be clear and bold together in how we go about this work. Thank you again for the privilege, for giving me the opportunity to share with you from a practitioner's view and to be able to lead alongside you. Thank you.